Hey astronauts, it's me, Brandy, and welcome back to Astro-Tarot Research. I decided to come on here because Mars is going into retrograde. Yes, on the 9th of this month, Mars is stationary retrograde. I've already done a long, intensive research on the transit of Mars in Aries. If you want to check out that video, I will link it up above here somewhere, and it'll go very in depth on what's going to happen in Mars in retrograde. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a tidbit, a little bit of a reminder of what we can see occurring. Whenever Mars in general goes retrograde, it's kind of like the fix-it period. Pretty much every planet, whenever it goes retrograde, it wants you to go back and redo a few things. Now, Mercury is the planet that we know goes retrograde the most, and it has to do with our communication and skills and, everyday sort of routine, which is why it goes retrograde the most. Mars, however, doesn't go retrograde quite often. Mars goes retrograde every 2 years. In fact, as I said in the Mars and Aries video, the last time Mars went retrograde was June 26, 2018 through August 27, 2018. So you can look at where you were at that point in your life, because anytime Mars goes retrograde, it does give a little bit of a flashback to when it was last retrograde. And not only that, we have to take in consideration of where Mars will be retrograding this time. And what I mean by that, I mean we need to look back at the Nakshatra placement Mars will be retrograding in. Mars will pretty much retrograde in Ashvini, and it will go retrograde all the way back to Revati, but it will not enter Revati until we get to October. So for this month of September, we will have Mars retrograding in Ashvini. So hope you guys don't mind my notes, but I do have them here like as always, and I'm ready to give you some flashbacks of the event. This month, we're going to be dealing with the themes that Mars has been dealing with since it stepped into the Nakshatra of Ashvini on August 19th. So the most popular events would be Steve Bannon arrested and charged with fraud. There was Kelly Conway stepping down. Obviously more violent protests with the shooting in Kenosha, Wisconsin. We have the Republican National Convention. We had the hurricanes, Jeff Bezos becoming the first person in history to exceed a net worth of 200 billion. Polio, I believe, was eradicated in Africa. And we also had the first documented case of someone being reinfected with COVID. Ashvini, as you can see, similar to the Revati themes of people stepping down from power or positions of power, such as Kelly Conway. We have people being chosen or officially chosen. Technically, people like Kamala Harris, she was chosen in Revati, which I said Revati and Uttara Ashadha, when Mars comes through it tends to put women in particular in positions of power. So you can go back to that video, Mars and Aries, and get all that information if you want. So what Ashvini is doing now that Mars is in here is it's just basically going to be heightening all the events that it has brought forth during Uttara Ashadha and Revati. Only this time things bring about a little bit more sort of natural disasters as well as blatant corruptions. As I said before, there's probably going to be some weird stuff going around election night regarding, recounts, voting methods, as well as hacking and all of this stuff. It's just going to do that. So Ashvini is just going to put things very much up front and in your face, because Ashvini is not known to be a subtle sign. It's not like it can't hide things, but given the current atmosphere, that's not really the intentions here. As well as when we have Mars going into Ashvini and we have somebody like Jeff Bezos becoming the first person who is just this crazy billionaire who's nobody's ever had a network like this. It's becoming the first of its kind in terms of wealth. And you wouldn't think the planet Mars was associated very much with wealth. But if you had seen my wealth study on my channel, then you know out of all of the planetary placements that Mars had the strongest effect on a person's personal wealth, and thus we can apply that to an economic level, where we have Mars, when it enters certain signs, is going to create a lot of chaos, or it's going to create a lot of stability depending on where it is. And when you think about it, it actually does make a lot of sense, because Mars rules your personal efforts, your actions that you place towards something. And I think a lot of people feel like the circumstances that they have been put in have been very fated, and in a way it is, because, you know, I do believe in astrology, so I do believe to some degree certain circumstances are fated. But what it's saying is, depending on the effort you place into something and the amount of time and focus and energy you pour into something is going to depend on how much you get back. And I don't want to get into like my Mars and wealth study, but Mars was creating and generating the most wealth when it was in Mrigashira. And in Vedic astrology, Mrigashira is in the sign of Gemini, and is also a Mars-ruled nakshatra. What happens when people have their Mars in Mrigashira is, not only do they have this boost of energy, so they are constantly pouring themselves out there, dedicating themselves into research, pushing past competition, because this placement can make you very competitive. But when we have the sign of Gemini, what they do is they don't put all their eggs in one basket, they spread out. So I just wanted to give that brief fact. So when Mars comes in Ashvini, what's happening to the wealth is it's doing something that it's never done before, where we have somebody who, I would say they're hoarding it, but we have a situation where somebody is profiting in a way like they've never done before, because the Ketu Nakshatras will bring about innovation. That's why I think during this time period, we're starting to see more news about vaccinations and stuff, and trial periods and testing things. That's what it's going to do in Ashvini. I don't think we're going to find a vaccination or a cure until Rahu moves into Rohini, just because there's been so many cures, fixtures, and things that come about during Rahu's in Rohini. But next year, when Rahu moves in Rohini, I think that's when we're really going to get that cure. Ashvini's more like a trial period, like, oh, we have some testing of this and that to do. This is the first model. What's going to happen when Mars goes retrograde in Ashvini is we're going to have very much similar the intensity and the fieriness that Ashvini is bringing, quite literally, but we're going to want to go back and fix these issues. Everything surrounding wealth and the stock market is going to be looked at from a different perspective, which I haven't even gotten into the full moon we just had in Shatabhisha. So that's going to be reevaluated. So I think even now the stocks are doing a little bit of a freaky thing, and once Mars hits retrograde, that's also either going to take a downturn, extreme downturn, maybe not extreme, but maybe extreme, because Ashvini can be extreme, or the market's just going to do more funky stuff. Another thing that's going to happen when we have this Mars retrograde energy is we're going to be taking a look at just all the shadiness going on with people's personal campaigns, people in roles of leadership, people who are feeling the need to politicize everything for their own gain. On a more personal note, when Mars goes retrograde in Ashvini, what it does is it makes you more impulsive. Now, you may think to yourself, you know, I'm not really that much of a reactive person. I can pretty much got my actions in control or in check. Well, Mars in Ashvini is going to put you in situations where it feels like people are testing or trying your patience. If you're a person who has been more explosive, or in the past, you may be more docile, or you may be working to be more docile, but you're still going to be put in those situations where people are going to test and try your patience in whatever area of life that this is transiting for you. I'm not going to go into the specific personal transits because this video is going to be, you know, too long if I do that. It's going to bring about that energy within your life, because we can look at this as Mars being conjunct Ketu. And one thing I've noticed is when people have Mars conjunct Ketu is they may say or do things without even thinking about it, and it can come across as very abrasive or very rude or just out of line. When Mars goes retrograde, that energy is going to intensify. It makes planets act out in a sense. It makes them say, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. So whatever area of life that you feel that you are engaging in and putting most of your energy into, it's going to ask you to reevaluate that, whether it's somebody, you know, testing you, trying your patience, and you feel like, oh my God, I explode sometimes and I just pour so much thought and energy into the things that this person says. Or maybe you don't, maybe you aren't explosive, but something about this Mars retrograde just really people are just like pushing your buttons and you're just like, oh, I can't stand it. And it doesn't even have to be that. Sometimes it's more like putting your efforts into a exercise regimen and maybe you feel like you aren't getting the results that you want. So Ashvini is going to say, okay, I need you to think about this from a different perspective and a different point of view, because this ain't working. I'm going to need you to try and be a little bit more innovative and take more risk and chances in that area, whatever area of life that this is transiting for you, maybe even your career. I know a lot of people will say don't try anything new during a retrograde period. That's not necessarily true. It's more like saying, if you haven't been thinking about this, if this hasn't been on your mind for a while, if you haven't done the research, if this is just a bright new idea from nowhere, maybe don't be so active about it. Maybe take your time putting it out there. But if this is something that's been on your mind for a while, like let's say you have wanted to buy new curtains, but you couldn't decide on the curtains and you've already done the research on all the curtains and you have 3 pairs of curtains to choose from, Mars retrograde is going to say, go ahead and buy the curtains and just figure it out. I personally have definitely gone through and done new things and been put in new different positions while Mars has been in retrograde, and they have pretty much worked out. What it does is it will bring about a lot of stressors, okay? It's kind of feels like everything's happening at once. We have to even look back to where Mars was retrograde before, back in 2018, and you know, during that time period there was the nomination of like Brett Kavanaugh, which you guys know led to a lot of different outrage and a lot of accusations being thrown. And then we also had the ending of the Trump and Putin summit, and as you guys know, that energy is obviously going to come up again, where we're going to have a lot of discussion about Putin and Russia's effect on the elections, especially when we get into Revati, but that's next month in October. And then the last time I remember there was this bailout for farmers going on with Mars retrograde, so you can expect us to revisit more stimulus checks, more bailouts, and finally sort of get the ball rolling on that and make some decisions. During the retrograde period, they're going to be forced to make those decisions because it's going to get to a boiling point. Don't be surprised when you are thrown for a loop and you are just thrown in situations in your life that you're just like, how is this happening now? Like what is going on here? Because Mars wants you to basically go back into areas of your life that you have maybe been out of line in. Maybe your actions have been very detrimental towards yourself. Maybe your actions have been detrimental towards others. Whatever it is, it's going to ask you to fix them. After November 13, where Mars goes direct, that's when we're going to have to put whatever habits or actions or efforts that we've been building into action, and we're going to have those things officially tested. I'm not going to lie and say that it's easy peasy, and retrograde is just super cool. Actually, in my own personal life, I think that time period of the year was probably the most stressful ever. Like, one of the most stressful periods of my life, that June 2018 era. It was just horrible. It really was horrible. But let's move on to the other things that are going on this month. As I mentioned just before, we had that full moon in Shatabhisha, and that happened on the 2nd. And I did a post on it on my Instagram. What's basically happening for the theme of this month is we're going to be looking at things from new perspectives, because when we get to the Rahu and the Ketu placements, it's less about truth and reality, and it's more having to do with your own personal truth and your own personal perspective. And when the moon comes there, and the moon represents the people, it's about everybody bringing their own thoughts and perspectives to the table. It does bring about criticism when it comes to hypocrisy of other people, even hypocrisy in your own life. You can even start to really reflect on the own actions and things that you may have said, as well as things that other people may have done and said to you. Really, what this placement does is it does intensify the emotional state, but it's not like everyone's going to come from a place of vulnerability, and it's not like you're gonna all of a sudden just understand everyone now. In fact, you may feel like people are more bizarre than ever. I just don't get it. I just don't understand what is going on, or why you're doing this, why you're saying this, why you're being this way. Like, I don't get your perspective. And when the full moon is in Shatabhisha, well, it's going to sort of force you to get that perspective. At some point in the month, there will be some sort of large hint on where you need to focus your mental activity, wherever house that this has been in. Let's say this full moon happened in your 3rd house. And let's say you were somebody who, when you communicate, you kind of felt like other people aren't as open as you, or something like that. You kind of felt like other people are hiding themselves, they aren't sharing their lives, they aren't being as vulnerable as you are. And you're just like, I don't get it. Why do people just so closed off to me? When this full moon happens in your 3rd house, you're going to look at things from their perspective and how you might be communicating towards them. Maybe there are parts of yourself that you have been maybe closed off to, and you haven't been completely vulnerable, or something like that. That's just one example. I mean, this could happen in every single house. With this Shatabhisha placement, what I've noticed in my studies is that they do sort of like to join groups, and it's not like they are super close with everyone. In fact, I think Robin Williams either has his moon or sun in Shatabhisha, and what he was describing is he has a very tight, close group of friends. It's like a nucleus. You have the outside layer, then you have the inside layer, then you have the really inside layer, and you have the close group of friends. Shatabhisha is, I believe, symbolized by the circle, so I thought it was kind of funny that he put things that way, but he said he just can't be vulnerable and he can't be open in the same way with the inside friends as he can with the outside friends. So you may even notice those boundaries and constrictions going on in your own life. Maybe you realize you had them in the small, close-knit circle of friends, and maybe they had you in the wide, close-knit circle of friends where they felt like they couldn't fully be themselves around you. So now maybe you reevaluate your nucleus. Maybe you decide to put them on the outside circle, and maybe you just have a different nucleus, people in your nucleus from now on. Is this example making sense? It's about drawing boundaries or feeling confined to certain actions based off of the criticism and judgment of others. Moving on to the next big event, we have Jupiter stationing direct on the 12th. And so Jupiter began its retrograde on May 14th. May 14th through July 11th, Jupiter was in Uttara Ashadha. Jupiter entered Purva Ashadha on July 12th, which is a Venus-ruled nakshatra. By the way, Uttara Ashadha is a Sun-ruled nakshatra. When we had Jupiter move into Uttara Ashadha, we had the George Floyd protest. That's when things hit that boiling point, which is so funny because I'm going to do a video on Jupiter in Uttara Ashadha with the Sun-ruled nakshatra, and that's coming soon, so look forward to that. When planets and major transits happening in Uttara Ashadha, that's when we get a boiling point when it comes to society, social injustices, laws, and practices that have been taking place which just aren't right. It's about rooting out corruption and taking back personal happiness for people and giving people more control over their fate and destiny. It's sort of like easing the pressure of society. When Jupiter came into Purva Ashadha, that's when we started looking at enacting new social laws and regiments and rules. And one of the biggest rules and laws that came into effect was Hong Kong's new security law. Hong Kong's new security law brings about new restrictions on social liberties. Like something like a simple act of protesting or maybe even vandalism can lead to life imprisonment. It's intensifying the restrictiveness of Venusian energy. Venusian energy is about creating boundaries, restrictions, social norms, rules, regulations. And as a result, I've said this before in my Mars in Aries video, it's going to bring about a lot of conflict between countries, and you can already see the US and I believe the UK pushing back against China, and there's also some conflict with the border when it comes to Nepal and China, India and China. The people got a lot of beef going on with China. There are some other countries that have made peace and, like, you know, kissed and made up. Israel and the United Emirates reached some sort of diplomatic normalization going on. As I was saying, back to Purva Ashadha, we had a general rise in violence going on here, and especially in Brazil, there was a gunman situation involving a man who hijacked a bus. There was a lot of militant group attacks which intensified in Nigeria. There's a lot of gang violence going on in Chicago. There's the huge explosion in Beirut. I looked up the story on this because with Jupiter in Purva Ashadha, what happens is we're highlighting social issues the same as we would with Uranus being in Bafrani right now. What has happened as a result of that explosion? A lot of people have been put into situations where they have lost their homes, they have lost their jobs, and the government hasn't done anything about it. I believe the Prime Minister had resigned, but as far as accountability and people being held up for their actions or changes being implemented or people being uplifted, getting their jobs back, getting homes and not sleeping in the street, nothing really has been done on that. Now, Jupiter's influence, because what I've noticed with people who tend to have Jupiter conjunct Venus or Jupiter in Uttara Ashadha or something like that, Purva Ashadha, what's happening is they're concerned about what is being taught. How can we teach people not to be hateful? How can we teach people to not be racist, to not be sexist, to not be so detrimental towards each other? But it's saying, how can we teach peace? Okay, so that's the sort of phrasing if you want to take that with you. But when it's going direct, I should say, what's going to happen is we're going to have to deal with all the rules and the new social structures and the societal implications that have been going on since the retrograde. And Jupiter goes direct, we're still going to have more protests and we're still going to have more people being outraged by, you know, all of the injustices going on in the world. It's just going to be a continuation of what's been done before. But when Jupiter gets into Uttara Ashadha again, that's when we're going to have another boiling point. Also, because there hasn't been much accountability going on, when Jupiter moves forward, there's going to be situations, set in place where people are going to need justice. Another thing that's also going to happen this month is we're going to have Saturn go direct as well. But this is towards the end of the month on the 29th. Since the 12th of January, Saturn has been in Uttara Ashadha. So Saturn's not really going to be changing any nakshatra placements, and it's going to be in Uttara Ashadha till the end of the year. When Saturn and Sun come together, it really likes to destroy the pristine image of authority and control. When you even just look at people who have Saturnian placements, it's all about destroying the ego, and it's all about making things no longer just about you, but about the people around you. It's here to point out your flaws. And if we take this to be quite literal in astrology, the Sun rules government and Saturn rules flaws, insecurity, fears, humiliation, maturity, destruction. When we have that, we want to implement new routines for the governments, new structures for the government. We want to replace people in power or to change their actions. We want to put them in positions where they are going to humble themselves and say that they're wrong, which is why we had leaders resigning, or people who are in powerful positions like Kelly Conway. What its direct motion is going to do is now we're going to really start moving forward and making some radical changes, because at the end of the day, Saturn's main rulership and its main meaning is transformation and change. And when we transform and we change something has to die. It's like when you change your perspective. Okay, so let's say you're walking around life and in your mind the sky is blue. You get to a place in your life and there's all of a sudden it's a cloudy day, the sky is gray, and you're like, hold on, what's going on here? The sky's blue, the sky's supposed to be blue all the time. My reality is changing. And when your reality changes, your perspective has to change. So now you're like, wait a minute, the sky's not blue all the time? That means my perception of reality has been wrong this whole time. Now you're no longer that same person you were before who used to believe that the sky was blue all the time. Now you're a person who has grown and changed, and now you understand sometimes the sky is gray. So it's about that transformation. You change as a person, you grow as a person, you learn new things, you implement new knowledge. But the point is, you can't be the same person with that same sort of ignorance before. When Saturn goes into any placement, ignorance dies, maturity goes into effect. You can look at Uttara Ashadha or pretty much any sun ruled nakshatra as the I'm fed up point. I'm over this. This is done. Because on a personal level, what this does is it creates frustrations and issues. Like, let's say you have family members who just, I don't know, they give you a lot of problems, they give you a lot of issues. And when Saturn's in Uttara Ashadha, you're just like, I am sick of this same old dynamic. I'm going to change this system. I'm going to change this structure. If you feel like somebody in your life has been placing rules, regulations, structures, ideas, or unfairness onto you, or even if you've been doing that to other people, this whole year actually has been the time where you're going to receive that pushback. if you haven't addressed your behavior or the behavior of others, well, you're either going to be dealing with this pressure for the next 30 years, because Saturn takes 30 years to sort of fully come around, usually like 27, 30 years. Or you're going to have to really find a different avenue in order to work around what has been placed upon you. The last time Saturn was in Uttara Ashadha was around like 1990. During this time period, obviously similar to now, there was quite a few protests going on in the world. One of the protests, for example, was the Strange Ways prison riot, which happened in Manchester, England. One prisoner was killed in the riot and about 147 prisoners were injured and 47 officers were injured. Now, this riot sparked a course of riots throughout England, Wales, and Scotland. And because of all of these prison riots starting, it caused an investigation to take place. And what the investigation found was the conditions that the prisoners were being placed in were pretty much uninhabitable, unlivable, and disgusting. With the protests in the riot, it led to a major reform in the prison system. Now, what I was trying to say before is, what if the prisoners had chosen not to riot? If they had chosen not to react or not to take charge of that situation or to make changes, then there would be no transformation. That is basically what I'm trying to say with you in your own life. If you refuse to make changes about the things that you in your life, you're like, this is at a boiling point, I can't take this anymore, I'm over this, you're gonna be stuck with them, okay? That's you, that's your life, you're gonna be in it, okay? If you refuse to make those confrontations, and I'm not saying going out and just be yelling and screaming at people with Mars retrograde, don't do that, but if you refuse to take a stand about what standards that you would like, then there will be no changes. All the stands that you've been taking in your personal life, all the actions that you've been taking towards striving towards your goals, towards pushing and propelling yourself forward, well, now you're going to finally start seeing the results. You're going to finally start seeing those reforms take place in your life, and you're going to start to see what that looks like. I hope I summarized that with what's going on and everything. Hopefully I can get to the point where I can do, you know, personal transits as well, because it should be interesting. And that is all for now. Au revoir.